February 1st, 2025, was a crisp winter morning in Washington, D.C. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the city. But for 75-year-old Elijah Jackson, the day held a deeper significance. It was National Freedom Day, a day to commemorate the signing of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, abolishing slavery and involuntary servitude. Elijah's eyes sparkled with memories as he dressed in his worn denim jeans and faded civil rights t-shirt. He had lived through some of the most tumultuous times in American history, and today was a day to reflect on the progress that had been made. As he made his way to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Elijah's mind wandered back to his childhood. Growing up in the Deep South, he had heard stories about his ancestors who had been enslaved, forced to work on plantations under the brutal conditions of slavery. Elijah's great-great-grandfather, Isaac, had been brought to America from Africa as a slave. Isaac had been forced to work on a plantation in Georgia, where he was subjected to inhumane treatment and brutality. But despite the hardships, Isaac had never lost hope. He held on to the dream of freedom, passing it down to his children and grandchildren. As Elijah walked through the museum's exhibits, he felt a deep sense of pride and connection to his heritage. He stopped in front of a display case containing a pair of shackles used during the slave trade. Elijah felt a lump form in his throat as he thought about his ancestors who had been forced to wear similar shackles. Suddenly, Elijah heard a voice behind him. "Sir, are you okay?" It was a young museum volunteer, concern etched on her face. Elijah turned to her, his eyes welling up with tears. "I'm fine, thank you," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm just thinking about my family's history." The volunteer nodded sympathetically. "I understand," she said. "It's a lot to take in, but it's also a reminder of how far we've come as a nation." Elijah smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude towards the young volunteer. "You're right," he said. "We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go." As Elijah continued through the museum, he came across an exhibit on the civil rights movement. He saw photographs of Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and other leaders who had fought for racial equality. Elijah's eyes misted over as he remembered his own experiences during the movement. Elijah had been a young man during the 1960s, and he had been actively involved in the civil rights movement. He had marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr., participated in sit-ins, and been arrested for his activism. But despite the dangers and challenges, Elijah had never lost faith in the cause. As he left the museum, Elijah felt a sense of hope and renewal. He knew that the struggle for freedom and equality was ongoing, but he also knew that he was part of a long chain of individuals who had fought for a better future. Elijah walked back to his car, lost in thought. He thought about his ancestors, who had endured so much to give him the freedom he enjoyed today. He thought about the civil rights movement and the progress that had been made. And he thought about the future and the work that still needed to be done. As Elijah drove home, he felt a sense of pride and connection to his heritage. He knew that he was part of a long and unbroken chain of freedom fighters, and that gave him the strength and courage to keep moving forward. The next morning, Elijah woke up early, feeling refreshed and renewed. He got dressed and went to his backyard, where he had a small garden. Elijah spent the morning tending to his plants, feeling the warm sun on his face and the cool breeze in his hair. As he worked, Elijah thought about the previous day's events. He thought about the museum and the exhibits he had seen. He thought about his ancestors and the struggles they had faced. and he thought about the future and the work that still needed to be done. Elijah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of children laughing and playing. He looked up to see his grandchildren, aged 6 and 8, running towards him with big smiles on their faces. "Grandpa, can we help you in the garden?" they asked in unison. Elijah smiled, feeling a sense of joy and contentment. "Of course, my dear ones," he said. And with that, Elijah and his grandchildren spent the rest of the morning working in the garden, laughing and talking together. It was a moment of pure joy, one that Elijah would treasure forever.